Okay, folks, we're going to get rolling. My name is Scott McGill. I sit on the board of the Beaver Institute, and I'm delighted to open up our next session. We have 4 speakers. They will be speaking on the lessons learned in planning for BDAs and Beaver needs. So I'm excited to introduce the first speaker, Dysart.
Nailed it.
Dysart, woohoo, got it right. Engineer with Wolf Water Resources, welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to be up here, finishing out this conference. Pretty inspired to see the work that you all are doing, and I may be preaching to the choir with some of this. My background is as a designer and as a consultant, not as a land manager. A lot of the time, I am working on projects with funders that want to see numbers of projects, numbers of river miles, acres of floodplain year after year, with kind of a lack of focus on stewardship. As BDAs and LTPBR treatments have become popular, people see like the rapid benefits of them. They get excited. They want them on their projects. And that stewardship piece seemed like it got overlooked a lot. So if I could leave or start with one idea to just stew, and then we'll just come back to it. It's that for any consultants and designers out there, better together, a big part of that is really communicating with your clients who are excited about these projects, about the stewardship needs and kind of the long-term approach that it takes to really see the benefits of these type of treatments. And then look at a few analyses, some simple things that you can all do, likely to look at those processes that are in place, how you can work together with those to get the outcomes you need, or to just gut check whether or not those processes are going to be sufficient to set your site back on a course to a self-sustaining project that you can walk away from and hopefully 20 years from now call a success. And look at some hybrid treatments when those processes aren't in place. So we've heard a lot about beaverscapes. Loved Colin's talk about all of the different scapes. And as many of us know, they're very complex. I'd like to introduce kind of this trifecta of the stream evolution triangle developed by Janine Castro and Colin Thorne. And it takes more than dams to build a beaverscape. Of course, ideally, we've seen lots of examples of really successful projects, and the most successful LTPBR projects are in the vicinities of beaver. The materials are there. Maybe it just takes a little bit of a push to get them going in the reach that we want restored. So working with them together is obviously the best case scenario, but it takes all of these pieces. And as an engineer, first, like my focus was hydraulics. I was like, had my head in HEC-RAS, and that's what I studied in school. Coming into river restoration, started to learn a bit more about sediment transport and the importance that that played, but really like the vegetation piece had been lacking. Often felt like it was a bit of an oversight, the importance that played in really bringing together all of these pieces to form that complete stream morphology that we love to see so much. And it's important to know that, and as many of you do, beavers are managers. They're not designers. They are managing these processes, and they have their own agenda. They're just trying to survive, make deep water. Sometimes they don't need to make deep water to survive, and they won't. They want to be lazy, just like us. But it's important that in trying to mimic beavers, we ourselves think like managers rather than just a designer or just an engineer. We can't just expect that it's going to take one push to get a system back on track to recovery, one silver bullet. Oftentimes, yeah, we need to look at, can we build these dams? Are these processes all there that the system can take over? Or what else do we need to incorporate to really fast track that? I'm working in a region, I work in Oregon, Washington. Most of the funding is for salmon. I work on the east side of the state, and a lot of those populations that we're focusing on restoring habitat for are critically endangered. So oftentimes time, which is really what's kind of missing from this triangle, is of the essence. And we don't have decades to wait for these processes to really play out. And so we're looking for options to fast track that as much as we can and really give it the big push that it needs so that we can make progress. So talking about timescales, an analysis by one of my colleagues for kind of gut checking these projects and, you know, what's it take for passive restoration to deal with reversing some of a lot of the incision that's very common, like throughout the West, throughout the East, in all of these streams that we've modified so much. What's it really take? And turns out sediment is oftentimes a very limited resource. A lot of these valleys filled during the Pleistocene, and the river has since cut down through all of those nice deposits, and the existing geomorphology and sediment transport is vastly different than what originally created these. You can see here this is using some just basic regression equations that have been done. I'm not a scientist, I'm an engineer. We deal in assumptions. And so this is just like a fast analysis that was performed using regression equations for bed load, material being transported, stream width, level of incision, all these factors combined. It assumes a 100% capture rate. So if we are able to capture 100% of the bed load coming in, this ignores fine sediment. I did see a good talk yesterday actually measuring fine sediment deposition behind beaver dams. Looking forward to seeing how that study goes so we can incorporate that. But yeah, if we capture 100% of the gravel and the goal is to raise these incised beds, bring that water table up, get our floodplains connected, how long does that take? The average of all these is about 85 years. So if we're willing to wait and put these passive restoration treatments in place and rebuild them year after year, maybe we can do some work in the next century. I don't think salmon have that long. I don't think a lot of our species have that long. So it's a very important consideration planning these projects. Vegetation. This is a big gap in my knowledge. And so often overlooked when you're working with fish bios as your clients and project managers who have been old school and they're very focused on the stream hydraulics, in-channel habitat. It's often felt like an oversight in developing our plan sets. So my plug to any designers out there is to really do some research on your local native plant communities, reach out to people, and really put some good effort into these planting plans and communicate the need to your clients to secure funding, to really have intensive planting efforts that go along with stream restoration. Anecdotally, and from reading through literature, a beaver can eat about an acre of woody riparian vegetation per year. If you are going out and, yeah, putting a bunch of fresh new plantings and you get a beaver that moves in, it could decimate that very quickly. To develop those, depending on the intensity of your plantings, it can really take like 10 to 15 years for that vegetation to reach a mature enough state that it can sustain like that beaver recolonization and get those effects. So again, timescales. What is manageable? What can we implement? And what other approaches can we take to make sure we're meeting those goals in the meantime? And just really setting this landscape back on track. So this kind of like sums that up. We have all these static tools, beaver dams, log jams, they get flanked, the stream moves, all things that we want it to do. We can't just set it and walk away if we want those long-term changes in stream morphology. It's critical that as managers, you all continue, sounds like you are being pretty dynamic, but just continue that. And as designers, again, communicate. Really set realistic expectations for these treatments and what they can do, timescales it takes, and how you help your client plan for that, secure other funding sources that they need to maintain those stewardship approaches, et cetera. To kind of wrap all these ideas into one, at a project we've just recently completed, been working on it for a few years, in Sheep Creek. It is a headwater tributary to the Grand Ronde in northeast Oregon, near La Grande. And it has been the site of restoration treatments for the past 12 years, approximately. Different groups have come in, tried the tool of the day, and the results just hadn't been there. This is after several years, or several of those treatments. So we can see some large wood got put in. It's hard to see, but there's these tiny little planting cages that were done. But the stream's morphology persisted. It was an incised single thread channel. And though it did have good floodplain connection actually during many of the high spring flows, those water tables dropped and the reach was almost completely denuded of woody riparian vegetation. Lodgepole pine were encroaching on the meadow, and we needed to explore other options. Critically, one of the treatments that's not shown here is BDAs. There was about 30 installed, and each spring the sediment would wash through. There was, as evidenced by a lack of gravel bar development at any large wood, no deposition behind any of the BDAs. They had really great, as many of you seen, the instant water table impacts from BDAs are incredible. But when you have an incised channel, high stream flows, the sediments that keep that water table high wash through, and the maintenance burden was just too high to keep coming in and rebuilding these every season after season, effectively to irrigate the willow that had been planted. So what other options can be used? I will have a trigger warning here. There is a big yellow machine. So we brought in the big yellow machines. The plan was to fill, so the treated reach here spanned a total of about 3 miles. We placed fill excavated from select borrow areas on the floodplain. So we were harvesting alluvium from deposits in the floodplain, filling the channel. Ultimately, we filled about a half mile in total within this 3 miles. That was broken up into various types of fill. We had some areas we went full bank full, and we're really targeting connection of relic channel features, high flow, floodplain scrolls. Fish passage is a concern working with salmonids. People are really sensitive and nervous about erasing the channel. And so many sections we filled to about 6 inches below bank full on average. And then some areas we left just a very confined section of channel about 1 foot wide or so. So once you do that, once you fill the channel, place all your large wood, you've got to yank. We had full valley connection. This stream gets down to about 3 CFS in the summer, and there was water all over the place. But you don't really know where exactly that water is going to go. Once you can estimate with LiDAR, but your error there is enough that you can't really be certain. And so here, brought back in Anabranch, and used also the Youth Corps. So it's good to see some folks talking about volunteerism. They were a really good resource for Trout Unlimited, and used those structures to then kind of manage flow, find where it was concentrated, and just really make sure it was distributed out as widely as possible across the floodplain, really dissipate that stream power, and just spread everything out. And it was amazing how fast you had pockets and depressions 100 yards from the channel having standing water in them as soon as we put all this in. A major factor, another critical piece, sounds like you all are no stranger to ungulate browsing, but most of the plantings that had been installed previously, they would only grow as big as their cage allowed. The elk browse was super intense. It was really difficult for any of these to really take hold in a mature sense. And I don't have a picture of it, but so there's these cages, but Levi Old with Trout Unlimited, who was the project manager, really was pretty innovative and created this cool elk fence that he kind of custom built to be mobile and flexible. They could move it around patch by patch, disassemble. If you are curious at all about having a portable elk fence option that you can use, let me know, and I'm sure he'd love for you to reach out to him. But another big part of this project was installing, I think about, again, like a half mile of elk fence to really just close off these newly connected floodplain areas, plant them intensively, and just, keep the browse pressure off until we can hopefully someday beaver move back in. But it ideally would be in about 10 years when that vegetation can handle it. So this is kind of the final product. As you can see, this is, like I said, I want to say this was probably 3 or 4 CFS wetting this whole thing at the upstream end. We put in several hundred pieces of large wood. You can see throughout like the floodplain grading areas. This is a nice pond feature. We left some deeper water habitat. You can see the old channel here, filled but not completely. All these new flow paths forming. We've got BDAs in here backing everything up, really helping with that distribution even further. And just another idea for you all to think about employing. I don't know what the water rights people would have to say about you guys filling in channels out here. That might be contentious. But I'll just end on really what this quote really sums it all together nicely. The landscape allows what it will. The conjunction of human and beaver has the potential to make rivers better if expectations are managed, relevant processes acknowledged, and luck intervenes along the way. And you should all check out this paper. I believe it's called Great Expectations by Caroline Nash and others. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alan. A great example of perseverance pays off in the long run. Thank you. So our next speaker, and if we have a little extra time, we might be able to do like a live Q&A before our closing ceremony. So just keep that in mind. Our next speaker, Sam Bango, Restoration Coordinator with Anabranch Solutions, joined by Alex Waite, and also a restoration planner with Anabranch. So welcome to you both. We'll get your presentation up here momentarily.
Is there no way to... We could probably just scroll through it if we just zoom in a little bit. Yeah, it should be able to be in a slideshow format. Maybe we could just zoom in a little bit. Oh, there you go. Well, hopefully our presentation works. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Bango.
And I'm Alex Walt. We work for Anabranch Solutions. We're a river science and consulting and construction firm. We help a lot of federal and state agencies, graduate students, soil and water conservation districts, nonprofits, landowners, all the like, get some of these LTPBR projects up and off the ground. Part of our mission in coming here today is to help nurture the momentum that so many of you are carrying into all these states, and it seems like outside of the country as well, which is really exciting. Our presentation is going to be kind of the nuts and bolts of how Anabranch is evolving the BDA design and construction approach that we've employed. I think a lot of people have gone through their own LTPBR projects, and so I'm going to probably skip through what a BDA is and why we like beavers and why we need to inundate the riverscape. But I will stop here because I think this is a motif that I want to highlight for our presentation. A lot of us come from different backgrounds and have different objectives, and we're using BDAs for different applications. A lot of us are trying to translocate beavers, so we might use a BDA to soften the landing and bolster the likelihood of colonization. Some of us are trying to aggrade channels and expand lateral connection. And different objectives require different approaches, and BDAs have evolved over time, and some of the design and construction of BDAs themselves might be appropriate to match up with your objective. So Sam's going to go through some of the evolving approaches and nuts and bolts of how Anabranch is building BDAs these days.
Awesome. So I'd love to get a show of hands of how many people in this room have been involved in a BDA project. Some aspect, okay, came to the right place. How many of those BDA projects have been a wicker weave BDA construction method? A lot of them. This is kind of a favorite, I think, for a lot of different restoration projects. I think we're all most familiar with this wicker weave style of construction. And for those that are a little bit less familiar, the recipe is pretty simple, right? You pound a line of posts. Hopefully it makes this beautiful U shape. You weave some materials in between those posts, like willow and the like. And then you add a ramp. And here I'm just going to pause and kind of briefly talk about BDA anatomy. So we've built this post line, we've weaved our materials, and then we add our ramp, which is on this upstream side of the BDA, That's all your soils and substrate that you're using to help push that water over the top of your structure. When we started implementing this kind of structure, our companies, some of our folks have been doing this for over a decade, and they implemented this style of structure. And the first thing that Nature's Best engineers came in and did was add what we're now calling a mattress. And that was a bunch of materials to the downstream side of our BDAs that functions. So that's all the material that's helping. It's all of your willows on the downstream side of the structure, whatever material it is, woody materials you're using. And so the ramp works to help push that water over the top of your structure. The water moves over the crest and then down through the mattress, dissipating that energy as it comes back into the stream. And so this structure type, we deemed it the Beaver Dam Analogue 2.0. It's really just following a closer mimicry to how beavers actually build their dams. The key difference between a wicker weave and this style of structure is that this Beaver Dam Analogue 2.0 can actually be built completely in the absence of posts. So you're building this ramp and this mattress simultaneously, and as you build that, you're paying attention to, well, what is the water doing? If that water's going through your materials and you're not seeing a lot of kind of slowing and ponding, perhaps you don't have enough of that ramp, so that muddy material on the upstream side. If that water, as you're constructing this BDA, is able to go up and over your structure, but it goes to that downstream side and starts to weir out on that downstream side, perhaps you just haven't built enough of a mattress. And so pay attention to the water as you're building. And I like to think a lot about food. So I think about sandwiches. It's really hard to build a sandwich around a toothpick. But if you build that sandwich first and then place that toothpick at the end, you have a lot more of your structural integrity in your sandwich. And so apply that to your BDA and think about your construction. You're creating, just like a beaver is, this structural integrity from the ground up. You're paying attention to how the water's responding as you're constructing and adapting as you go through this process. And just a couple other notes. When we are constructing BDAs, we're taking sediment typically from the upstream side in our ponded area. If deep water is one of your goals, then as you're taking that substrate and building that ramp, you can help deepen your pond and actually widen that pond as you're building that. I'd also like to note that I think it's really easy for a lot of us to go to beaver complexes, look at a beaver dam, and go, gosh, that's a lot of wood. But for those of us, and I know there's many of us in the room who've spent time mucking around beaver complexes, you know that when you get into that pond and you start walking through the upstream side of that dam, you can get stuck because there's so much substrate and fine sediments and whatnot that they have pushed into that ramp to create that structural integrity. And so when you look at a beaver dam, and as you start to construct your beaver dam analog, think about creating like a 1-to-1 ratio of woody materials to that substrate that you're using for that ramp. I also will note that at Anabranch, this has become our default structure type when we're building BDAs. We still utilize wicker weaves, but in more of a special use case, perhaps in more of our intermittent streams or places that have a really high sediment input. Maybe if we know there's been a recent fire on the hill slopes and we know that sediment's going to come in and fill in our structure, we'll move into kind of that wicker weave style of construction because it is faster. But this structure type, if your goal is that deep water, that deposition, and a lot of that structural integrity, this has become a default for us. And so I'm going to pass the mic over to Alex, and he's going to go through what those cases are and kind of comparing and contrasting those structure types.
Thanks. And I'd like to just reiterate what Sam also said about how much mud is in front of these dams. It's always impressive how many 5-gallon buckets a crew might pour into these BDAs. Someone might ask me, do we need 2 or 3? I'm like, how about 30 more buckets? It's really impressive, and I might even go as far to say that we see beavers as kind of stick creatures, but I honestly see them as mud creatures. They thrive on that, and it's such an important component of BDA construction. And to compare and contrast where we might use which type of structure or land and somewhere in the spectrum of in between, it's reach specific. If we're trying to activate a lot of lateral connection, side channels, or floodplain, and we want that BDA to sustain higher flows, we're going to incorporate a lot more investment into this modern BDA that we're building. But there's other places where the channel is really wide. There's a lot of sediment movement in that system. Maybe there's a recent fire that's going to flush out a lot of runoff. We're going to maybe focus more on redundancy, because I think a couple of presentations have highlighted how fast some of these BDAs can fill up with sediment. And so we're going to employ a lot more of the wicker weave. But even with the wicker weave, we're laying our brush streamwise, not perpendicular anymore. And we're putting a mattress in. I'll often have crews do 2 lines of posts to really thicken out that mattress to prepare for high flow and some scour. So matching the objective with your BDA approach can really help find out what your best design and implementation is going to look like. And some other ways that we're trying to improve our construction and pass on to some of our partners is this emphasis on lateral connection. I think a lot of presentations have focused in on how big the riverscape actually is. And so if we can place our BDAs in key places that maximize that, we actually buy ourselves more stream length to do more structures, just kind of putting more work on our backs. And there's a lot of beaver dams that are in the areas that we work that they don't rely on any riparian woody vegetation, because there is none. They're building dams out of just grass and mud. And I think that's a really important part of how we're evolving. We put so much grass and forbs and just organic material into these, and especially for our dryland folks where a lot of the soil is silt and can wash away even in low flows. This is really going to help kind of tie things together. We're putting a lot more secondaries in the places that we've sunk investment into a primary BDA that might activate a big long side channel. The secondary BDA prevents some scour behind, and it's a really important part. We see that in beaver complexes as well. And just like to reiterate, just the volume of brush and sediment that we use it just always impresses me, and I think anyone who's built these knows well how much it gobbles up. I mean, this picture is a depiction of a couple BDAs that each one gobbled up a 14-foot dump trailer stacked 8 feet high of brush, and so it just devours it, and that equivalent amount of sediment too pouring in there. And then, of course, our beaver friends moving in down lower and building that beaver dam that really humbles us and reminding us how big these dam structures can be, and maybe leaving us with the question, how big should we be building our BDAs? And that's a deeper question about investment and spatial extent, but it's an important part. And the last thing that I think I wanted to talk about is moving into some bigger systems. I think Alan brought up a great point of integrating some type of stage 0, or maybe this is a post-assisted log structure approach. Maybe this is natural log jams or just a strategically felled tree, but there's a lot of systems out there that are much too big for a single BDA. But if we can ally with large woody debris and break up single-threaded streams into multiple channels, then we can start introducing this restoration technique onto the floodplain and into the side channels And this is in honor of a lot of the beaver complexes that are in the places that we work that are much too big for them to build in the main channel. They're off in the floodplain and they're thriving. So I invite you all, if you're looking at a system that might be too big to practically build a BDA, think about how you can integrate large wood into that project and get things out into the floodplain and then start building BDAs. But yeah, with that, I think I'll let Sam wrap us up.
So if there's one thing you step away from this presentation with, I hope it's just that there's a lot of different ways to construct BDAs, and that method of construction can be changed and adapted to meet your specific project goals. And so if you're a project manager, a designer, a funder, be thinking about these different construction methods and whether redundancy is really important to you, or if you have the time to be able to really sink in and put a lot of material into your stream, kind of building that Beaver Dam Analog 2.0. We're always looking at whether it's reach and redundancy and trying to get a lot of structure within stream systems. So no matter where you are in that planning or implementation process, know that there's a lot of different ways to do this and ways that fit your specific project goals. When possible, maintenance is often a lot less expensive than your initial implementation and can be a really great part of your adaptive management. As well, monitoring can be extensive, or it can be as simple as rewalking your project site and learning from your implementation and bringing those lessons into your adaptive management. And ultimately, we're adding structures to riverscapes with variable levels of outcome uncertainties. And if you're not sure exactly which construction method you want in your project, bring your focus back to your initial goals. And don't hesitate to adaptively manage, and know that whatever structure type you add, you're initiating processes and not concluding at one static system state. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Alex. That was great. And as a reminder, I think we do have a little bit of extra time at the end, so save your questions, and we'll bring all these speakers back up for a little Q&A before we jump into their closing ceremony. Our next speaker is Fred Phillips, owner of Fred Phillips Consulting. Fred, welcome, and we'll get your PowerPoint up here momentarily.
That's an awesome slide. That's not mine. I wish it was mine. Everyone want to get up and sing again? We have an Irishman in the room that likes to sing. Beaver joke. Let me think on that one. Do I just advance with where do I advance it? Excuse me. Where do I, right there? The arrow keys or the clicker will work.
The arrow keys here. Right here.
Oh, okay, great.
There you go. Oops, I just gave it away.
Awesome.
There you go.
There's a clicker up there. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. It's great to be here. This has been such an inspiring, hopeful conference, and I've learned so much. So thank you all for sharing. I'm going to talk about 3 projects today. This is a nice picture of the Colorado River Delta before that pulse flow that happened a few years ago. I'm going to go to the lower Colorado to start things off. This is definitely not a a light touch project. It's a heavy hand, but there's a great beaver story part of it. This is the Laguna Conservation Area. We did this with the MSCP and Natural Channel Design, and as a blanket caveat, all these projects are big groups of people, consultants, stakeholders. I'm just the messenger, and I'm actually sad my Hopi and Navajo colleagues couldn't speak with me, but they said to speak well and say hello to all of you. But the Laguna Conservation Project, this is a 1,000-acre project. We moved about 1 million yards of dirt, put a hole in a dam, did a 20 CFS channel. It was to basically mitigate for California drawing a lot of their water out of Lake Havasu. So it's a multi-species conservation plan. This is a 4-mile stretch of river, and my story here, I don't know if you can see a mouse up here, but you can see that main channel on the left. That's where we put a hole in Laguna Dam and the irrigation headworks. And we ran out of budget on the project on this right side. We wanted to put some secondary channels. We were building big levees with Rubicon pour-over gates. It was a $25 million project. We ran out of money, so we were unable to build that second levee. Complete reconstruction. It was all Phragmites, salt cedar, so it was 2 years of clearing, excavating, grading. But this was the site before we got water on. And then this is 3 years later, after about 1 million plantings and a lot of maintenance, but beautiful area. And lo and behold, our buddy showed up, and he did the last probably $250,000 worth of work for us by building this 350-foot-long beaver dam that was about 3 to 4 feet tall. So it was so cool to go back 4 years later. And the 30 years I've worked on the Lower Colorado, Yuma East Wetlands, Aja Cobb Preserves, work we've done in the Colorado Delta, the beavers show up on every project. So it's a really cool thing to see. But now I'm going to move north. One of the most exciting things about this work that we all do the last 30 years, this was on the Yuma East Wetlands and the Laguna projects, was to find a nesting pair of yellow-billed cuckoos. On these sites, we have multiple pairs of Ridgeway rail, yellow-billed cuckoos, California leaf-nosed bat, Yuma hispid cotton rat, teeny species just flooding into the place. And we did a 3-year study in the Yuma East Wetlands, which was similar, and just taking these areas from salt cedar, Phragmites, back to aquatic wetland, riparian, 4 times higher density and diversity of birds, 5 times on butterflies. So it's been incredible to watch this all happen, which, as you all know, beaver dams do the same. I'm going to move north up to the Navajo Nation. There's a place called Sagiet Canyon. The map on the right is a map of Sagi. This area, when we were doing the design and planning for it, we talked to elders, we looked at historic documents, and this canyon used to be a series of pools and wetlands all throughout. Today, now it's same story with a lot of canyons in the Southwest, 30 to 50-foot head cuts. But the elders said there was beavers in there. That was probably a big part of it, with the overgrazing and the wet period at the turn of the century. But they always leave the beaver out of that conversation, and you've got to figure that the beavers were a big part of that conversation. This canyon is one of the ecological treasures of the world. I think it should be a World Heritage Site, Navajo National Monument, cliff dwellings, just archaeology galore, all kinds of wildlife, really beautiful place. And to kind of set up what we're doing in there, we surveyed about 250,000 acres of Navajo, Western Navajo, in 2016 to look at the carrying capacity of the range there. In a matter of 8 years, the carrying capacity at land decreased 26%. So with climate change, all the sedimentation, all the dust, I mean, it's really on a downward spiral. Navajo Nation estimates there's 60,000 wild horses on Navajo, 20,000 on Hopi. That's not including the cows, the sheep, and the other wildlife that are now feral. So there's a really big issue to deal with there. And then Sagiet Canyon, is a series of these different side canyons, some perennial, some intermittent, some ephemeral. But this is kind of the overall story, and there are a lot of down cutting, disconnected floodplains, a lot of erosion, a lot of overgrazing. So when we started Sayget, being an outsider, it was kind of tough to get the 11 families together. But what's the best way to get people together is buy everybody breakfast at the local restaurant. So this restaurant kind of turned into our, council house for a while, and we would meet, biannually and just talk about what people wanted. Most of the families were in total favor of this. They realized that, they were losing their land, they were losing important cultural treasures, they were losing plant medicines. So most everyone was really up for it. So after 4 years of, range management plans, EAs, 404s, a lot of people in here know the drill, we finally got the go-ahead. And the community, they're the ones that came up with this vision for Sayget Canyon, one of the cooler vision statements for a project, and it was born from the family. So we had our vision, we had the permits, and then one of the things I just so enjoy about working with the different tribes is the ceremony. And this is Martha Austin. She's standing with the medicine bag, and Anderson Hoskey's the medicine man on the left. But every project that we do in Sayget, the families will get together. We'll bring the medicine man in. He'll sing songs to the canyon to let it know. We're going to be driving posts in the ground. We're going to be different things. So a really beautiful part of this project. And then trigger warning here. The next part is getting the feral livestock and horses out of these side canyons. So I work with a group of young Navajo men out of Tuba City. And it's pretty intense, dangerous work, but it's our first step is to get the livestock out, harvest it. I actually ate my roast from this bowl a couple days ago. It was pretty tasty. But they harvest everything. We reuse as much as we can, and then we go in and build fences across these canyons to keep all of the feral livestock and horses out. It's really brutal work, rock drills. We're going up and down 300-foot vertical. It's pretty difficult work. And then in Sayget, and it's in Canyon, many places on Navajo and Hopi, just severe head cutting happening. This happened because there was a crew who came in and did herbicide spraying, didn't really pay attention to the temperature and where the wind was going, and they nuked about 10 acres of virgin cottonwood willow forest. And now the whole thing's just starting to unzip. So if you're using herbicide, be careful. And then we got to work, build One Rock dams. This is Janelle Wilcox. She works for Navajo Nation. Super awesome young woman and a true leader. And we just started building, dozens of One Rock dams. My Navajo crew like to say Navajo bowls instead of Zuni bowls. Lots of Zuni bowls in the ephemeral intermittent areas. And then we work with Northern Arizona University. We try to get as much seed and cuttings as we can from the site, and then we'll work our way out. But we usually do a grow of about 4,000 to 6,000 plants for each project when we're done with structures. So over the last 7 years, we protected about 12,000 acres of Sayget Canyon. We have about 10,000 to go. But just getting the livestock out and building the fence, the ecological uplift that we're getting on miles of stream is pretty extreme. This would be a mitigation banker's dream, and maybe someday the tribes will be able to participate in mitigation banking, which I believe needs to happen. And then some of the smaller springs, this was just a spring that was down cutting, so we built a PAL, some BDAs, you use some logs for erosion control. In a matter of 2 years, it's graded like 4 feet. It's really soaking up that water. It's creating lag flows, doing its job. And then our more recent exciting one, this is Sumac Canyon, which is one of the wetter canyons in Sayget. And this is my friend Martha Austin. When she was a little girl, she was born in this canyon. And this is Martha today. And Martha wants to permanently protect this canyon, this 400 acres, completely stop any grazing, essentially make an easement, which there's no process for permit holders to do yet. And she wants to protect it for the cultural medicines, plant medicines, and for her tribe in the future. So this project this spring, we built about, I think 12 BDAs. We used turf, willows. We didn't do as much weaves. This is pretty high in the watershed. This was about 4 hours after we built this BDA. So we have really dense willow, alder, aspen, cottonwood, Russian olive. But we're getting closer to, we've got the canyon protected, we've got the BDAs, everything's filling up, and we're working with Navajo Nation right now, and they're trying to craft a beaver reintroduction plan. So if anyone has one of those, I need a template. But we're in the process, and hopefully in the next year or so, we're going to have beavers in this area. Yep, there he is again. The Navajo Nation, 17 million acres. We're also working with the Navajo Nation Department of Justice, the Water Rights Unit, the Dene plant folks, and we're looking at 15 different watersheds across Navajo, from Black Mesa all the way down to Ganado, around 150,000 acres of watersheds. And we'd like to get beavers in the tops of these watersheds and do restoration that we can on the rest. So we're working with American Rivers and some other NGOs to get conceptual design so we can go after some of this infrastructure money, America the Beautiful, and start scaling what we're doing in Sigget. The next one, I got 2 minutes, so I'm going to blast through this one. Now we're going to move to the Hopi tribe. This is the Ponksikia. It used to be called Keams Canyon, but the clan chiefs, when we were doing the planning, said it's not that, it's the Ponksikia, that's its name. This is a 250-acre canyon near First Mesa on Hopi. This is a really important area for harvesting cultural medicines and ceremony. There's a series of probably 10 springs in it. It's still an intact canyon. There used to be beavers in it, but not anymore. And this is a map of it, Keams Canyon, the little village is down the stream. So this is where we started working this year. We've got 2 big impoundments that have undersized overflows, so we're working on that. But the first project we did was looked at historic photos. There's evidence of beavers in them. We got these from NAU University, old beaver dams. And my friend Max Taylor sent me this picture last night to share with you. And this is a Tewa Yaniwa dancer. And Max told me that this beaver pelt came from Keams Canyon probably 40 to 50 years ago, because there haven't been beavers in there for a long time. But these dancers represent the clouds, and then they wear the beaver pelt because the beaver gives them energy and power to bring the rain back. It's a rain dance. So a really important part of that to them. This is Prince and Kalatita and Curly. They're on our crew. These guys have lived around and in this canyon their whole lives, so super excited to be a part of healing it. We met with the village, the clan chiefs. Hopis run a little different. It was an executive order, not a treaty. So First Mesa Village is kind of their own autonomous unit. And then here's our first project, a bunch of BDAs, One Rock Dam, Zuni Bowls, and I'm about out of time, but these are just a couple before and afters. We ran out of rocks, so we started making juniper bowls. So we just work with whatever we have as we're going along. We don't let perfect get in the way of good, and then a bunch of different structures using materials. So, and this project, and this is I thought this shot was beautiful because this is the coyote tobacco, which may be in these prayer things, but we really work with the elders in the villages to find out what plants that they really want in there to harvest and use. So, and the list of our sponsors and the Ponksikia project, we're also in the process of working with the Hopi tribe to get beavers in there. The elders and the community are super excited. So hopefully next time I see you all, I'll have some good beaver stories from Hopi and Navajo. Thank you.
You okay to stick around? So Fred, stick around. I'm going to invite Alan and Sam and Alex back up to the stage and put you in the hot seat for a few minutes. And wow, what a lot of amazing projects there, Fred. And to the whole group of you. I have a question for Alan, just get things rolling here. What suggestions do you have? I mean, it seemed to me like the elk, you almost had elk and deer pasture there versus cow pasture. And any suggestions on, if you see that on a proposed site or a potential site, can you deal with that on the front end versus the back end, or is there a sequencing that might help with all the overgrazing that you saw on that project?
That site had currently not, it had been excluded from cattle grazing for quite a while. But yeah, the elk came in and thrived. There was lots of white-tailed deer. I don't know how much effort was put in up front to keep those out and see how things regenerated. Basically, the site survey found almost no remnants of any woody riparian vegetation at all. It was completely gone. It had been part of a sheep ranch for about 150 years, and they had done a pretty good job wiping everything out. I'm sure, yeah, on other sites, if you have those remnants, you could fence and get some serious uplift just through exclusion. But there was an incredible seed bank of wetland grasses and forbs that just immediately sprung back, which was very cool to see. So,
other questions?
Hi there. On all of these projects, I'd kind of want to get your guys' feedback on, the idea of like ecological stewardship, long-term, connection, and a lot of the, the low-tech PBR stuff seems like it really requires that. And so I'm wondering, like, on some of these projects, is there a plan for like routine and long-term ecological stewardship? And then as far as on tribal lands, are the tribal nations, are they gearing up to have crews that are going to go out there and maintain these sites in perpetuity like they have since time immemorial?
I'll just answer what I know about this first. On Sheep Creek in particular, yes, there is a plan in place. Levi with Trout Unlimited has really made that his pet project and is really pushing to get the word out on stewardship. I think it's less common in our region. People seem to bounce, they like a turnkey restoration project and then on to the next one with very little, there's almost no funding for monitoring often. And so, yeah, hopefully that catches on. I think it's really valuable and we could do a lot better work. With the tribes, I mostly work with the Umatilla tribes, and usually it's a couple guys managing each watershed, and their crews are pretty limited. And to my experience, there has, been kind of lacking in really approaching it with that stewardship mindset. So big area for improvement. And like I said, that kind of comes to us as consultants as well to really communicate that to them and push that and get that ball rolling. So.
I think maintenance should play a much bigger role in a lot of these projects, and I think we saw a couple presentations over these last 3 days that have highlighted the importance of volunteering, and I think that's a really easy task and great task for volunteers to get more integrated into these projects, because then they can arrive and see how things have changed over a couple years. They can see initial treatments. Maybe they can learn on site on how to build a BDA just by looking at what's been built, and it doesn't shoulder all of that workload on them. So we've partnered with plenty of different organizations that follow up with volunteers, and part of the other stewardship that is kind of connected to what Alan is working on with the fencing is we're changing the hydraulics, we're changing the water table, and in a lot of these places that have been splash dammed like Sheep Creek and overgrazed after that, natural recovery of vegetation isn't going to be immediate, and that's another great way to integrate other folks into the projects, is get planting campaigns that follow up. That's part of why I'm doing these projects now, is that I think integrating planting and LTPBR implementation is a great way to find synergy and success. But maybe I can pass over for another perspective.
Yeah, at least in Saget Canyon, one of the most frustrating things has been the cows and horses, because we try to build wildlife-friendly fences, with the smooth wire at the bottom, bigger gap at the top. But wild horses, they laugh at that stuff, so we're having to build some meaner fences. And, every time a big flash flood comes through, trying to build a crossing that'll withstand, 4,000 CFS flow is pretty tough. But we've actually cracked the nut on that. A couple of the old ranchers in there are pretty handy with welding and stuff, so we built these breakaway gates that are working under flashes. And then at least with my practice and my work with Navajo, I always work with and hire the families that are in these different canyons, so they become the stewards after the project. And the BIA basically says, we're working on getting the funding and BIA and building all of it. And then once we're done, it's the permit holder's responsibility to maintain these canyons. But I've also worked that into grant applications to, get people work and paid work out there. So, but the stewardship's really important. I think, at least in Saget Canyon, I think we need 2 people in perpetuity over the years, just being stewards for that whole place, and what a wonderful job to have.
I think I'll just add a couple of things too. I think that the maintenance and monitoring of these projects can be tricky to get funding for. And so it takes a village, and luckily on many of these projects, we have so many incredible partners coming together to work on them. And I do think that volunteering is a great way to be able to sustain these projects through time and be able to work on them. I also think that we should have thoughtful discussion about how we're funding these projects. And if you are a funder or someone working on the back end of a contract, really thinking about how those funds can get used throughout time and who has access to them. Because I think that volunteering is important, but we should also consider who is able to access those volunteering opportunities and be able to properly fund these crews to be able to go out and work on these projects through time. And I think that relates to a lot of work with the tribes and having, it's different in every region. Alex and I have gotten to work on projects all across the West and seen lots of different approaches, lots of different funding approaches. But I think that funding piece is really critical and a very important discussion as we move forward in just thinking about how are we paying those folks to be able to come out and do this work that is so important and that we care about so much.
I'll say one piece on funding. Just on Sheep Creek, the funding was pretty creative. We got a big chunk from Bonneville Power, but they had also funded the 2 prior restoration efforts at the site and weren't super excited about spending a huge amount of more money for a 3rd round. And so, I think there wound up being at least 6 grants in total and some match money that wound up funding that project.
Well, this has been a great conference, and I really like it, but I have to repeat what a professor said clear back in the Precambrian, or the early 80s. I'm not sure which, but he said if you're going to do a stream habitat improvement project, first you have clearly defined goals and what constitutes success. Second, monitoring. People skip it for a variety of reasons. We don't need to go over them, but if you're writing grants, write in monitoring, money for it, if you can't get volunteers. And I like your lay down idea. Well, build a fence that will lay down during high flow events, climate extremes, and then you just have a spring that will bring it up once the flow goes down. Would that work?
Seems like more. I mean, we use swinging up. You know, we build a metal gate and then we put like 3/4 inch metal tubing all the way to the bank full, and then we put weak wire on that, and then it blows out. It comes back down. So that's worked the best for us. Springing up, I don't know.
Well, it's the same principle, a different way of doing it. Thank you all for speaking.
You talk about the need for monitoring and stewardship. Do you have a rule of thumb on 50% of the budget, 10% of the budget? Each one is different?
I think each one is probably different. It depends if you have to hire crews to come in, if you're doing that work in-house. I can't speak too much to it. I don't write those grants, but I have seen like the variability of, hiring consultants and technicians versus doing in-house work. So I think it varies widely.
Maybe this is a different way of answering that question, but I do find when building BDAs, coming back even just a couple weeks later goes a long way. So reserving some type of your funding for later on in the season, especially before the winter arrives, to patch up holes. You know, beavers do this every single night, and so the perfect answer is, well, you need funding to be out there every night, but it's not practical. But if you can set aside some money to send a crew back and patch up the holes and maximize the gains, that goes a long way, and we've experimented with that, and it is really effective. I think also stretching into 2 years so you can learn from your own implementation. That's not exactly monitoring, but it's adaptive management, and that's a big principle that we're trying to convey to everyone.
I do have some actual numbers I could throw at that now that I think of it. I think the estimate we originally had, like per BDA, was about $2,000 to build the initial structure. And then also included in that budget, we had line items for repairing existing BDAs, and those were about $200. So.
I have a question for you here. I feel like this maintenance and expansion thing is really what is critical to taking it from sort of beaver dam mimicry to true beaver mimicry. I'm wondering in the difference between the post structures and the postless structures, if when you have flows that are partially or fully destroying the structures, if without the posts you still have some sort of framework there to do repairs if you're losing something without using those posts, if that makes sense. Like you still have the posts there to rebuild afterwards if a big flow comes through and blows things out a little bit. Do you still have something to build from if you don't have the posts involved with your BDA?
So I guess you're asking, if some of that structure washes away, moves downstream, are you starting from ground zero, or do you still have something to build with? Is that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the really cool things about these kinds of projects is that you're really interacting with this ecosystem, and you're changing the geomorphology. Like you have sediment filtering out into your pond, and that can persist even longer than the structure itself, which is pretty interesting. And so there's kind of this, we're building this Beaver Dam Analog kind of 2.0 construction method, and it can do a lot of really great things, but one of them is it's a little bit more efficient at trapping sediment within that pond. And so you can have, perhaps some of the structure moves downstream, but you still have something to work with typically, even after a higher flow event. I'd also like to just note there too that wicker weaves and this Beaver Dam Analog 2.0 can, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, fail differently. That wicker weave structure can kind of get pushed over like a fence falling versus that Beaver Dam Analog 2.0. What we usually see is that it's actually just like one little corner or one little part of it that ends up migrating downstream. And so the maintenance on that is actually generalizing more. It's more minimal than typically kind of that restart with your wicker weave structure. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the different construction methods can alter how much maintenance is needed.
Yeah, I've really found through a lot of failures in the sand-dominated systems, especially in ephemeral and intermittent. You know, we usually do one rock dams, maybe 12, 18 inches high. When we do the wicker weaves or BDAs in those sand-dominated bigger systems, it seems like they're just blowing out around, but the rocks like 12, 18 inch lifts, and then you can build them later on. And then higher up, like in Sumac Canyon, at the very top is where we were doing those. They're essentially turf and willow, sagebrush, and more sealed up because it's higher up and we didn't get the velocities, but those are a couple observations I've had.
Do you have any self-sustaining systems on any projects that you have done, and how long that may have taken to get to that point?
We have a few long-term projects where beavers have moved in, and that's the obvious answer, is when they take over, they just run with it. And some of our other projects, though, we waited a long time for a response, and we implemented in a drought, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and no sediment moved. And some of the projects that have had disturbance events, like a landslide up in the headwaters or a wildfire coming in, that actually starts to kick in the processes and starts to propagate downstream from the project sites, where we're seeing a lot more wood accumulations. In some of the areas that we're working, some of those main channels are breaking into floodplains, and now the beavers are moving in naturally without any intervention, and that's really exciting. And so I think one thing that I think a lot of speakers honed in on, and I'll do that again, is patience is really hard, but it's really necessary with this work. And I think patience matched up with a natural disturbance event can yield some of those results that you're talking about, and they can propagate both downstream and upstream. So I don't know, maybe you guys have anything.
Guys, I think we're going to wrap up. Fred, Alan, Sam, Alex, what a great conversation we've had with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing. A round of applause. Yeah, just put it down. Thanks, Fred. It's great stuff. So we're going to give everybody a bio break, a snack break, a conversation break. There's still some vendors here. We're going to regather here at 4:05. So we have about 15 minutes or so. And you don't want to miss this. This is going to be an interactive session facilitated by the Beaver Institute staff. Talk about where we're going and the future. Thank you.